Boeing, the symbol of innovation. A company once trusted to push aviation forward now lays a chain of decisions that cost 346 lives. They said the aircraft was as safe as any plane ever flown. Yet one crash was followed by another almost identical one. Two tragedies, only months apart. Like what went wrong? Why did a machine built to save time end up stealing lives? Why did Boeing choose profits over passengers? For decades, Boeing ruled the skies. But then came a new rival, Airbus, with a plane that threatened everything. The A320neo, a jet that burned less fuel, saved airlines millions, and reshaped the market overnight. Inside Boeing, quiet panic spread. What would Boeing do to keep up? If they didn't respond fast, they would fall behind. But creating a brand new aircraft would take years and billions. Too slow, too costly. So they chose the shortcut. Instead of designing a new plane, Boeing decided to upgrade an old one, the familiar 737, a design from the 1960s. Cheap, proven, and easy to sell. But then came a technical nightmare. How do you make an old plane behave like a new one? Because the new, larger fuel-efficient engines didn't fit under the old 737 wings. To make it work, engineers pushed them forward and higher, a small change with a massive consequence. The plane developed a dangerous nose-up tendency. In certain situations, it could climb too sharply and risk a stall. So did Boeing redesign the aircraft? Did they re-engineer the structure? Did they admit the risk? They did none of that. Instead, they created MCAS, a hidden software tool meant to automatically push the nose down. On paper, it was a fix. In reality, it raised far bigger questions. Why was MCAS tied to a single sensor? Why were pilots never told about it? And how could a software patch control the entire aircraft pitch? What was MCAS really hiding? Well, MCAS wasn't built for safety. It was built to protect Boeing's profits, specifically to avoid expensive pilot retraining and keep the 737 MAX competitive in the race against Airbus. A software patch, covering a structural flaw, a mask, not a solution. MCAS was supposed to be a safety feature. But the more you understand it, the more it feels like a secret that never should have existed. In simple terms, if one angle of attack sensor, the small device that measures how high the nose is pointing, reported the nose was too high, MCAS would automatically push the nose down. But the system had a flaw no one expected. It could activate again and again every few seconds. Then why didn't pilots know about MCAS? Well, because Boeing didn't want them to. Simulator training for thousands of pilots would cost airlines millions, slower sales, lower profits. So MCAS was hidden, manuals weren't updated, and pilots stepped into the cockpit of a new aircraft unprepared. As one internal explanation later said, the system was designed so pilots familiar with previous 737 generations wouldn't need costly new training. This was all about economics. And not long after came the first warning, the night before the Lion Air crash. A different crew flying the same aircraft faced the exact same problem. A faulty sensor triggered MCAS, and the plane began forcing its nose down without reason. Those pilots fought it manually. They survived, and they wrote a detailed report describing the malfunction. But could the crash have been prevented? Yes, but Boeing never grounded the plane. They didn't fix the issue. They didn't warn other crews. Hours later, the next morning, the Lion Air pilots faced the same nightmare. MCAS kept pushing their aircraft down again and again while they struggled to pull it back up. For minutes, they fought the software until the plane finally overpowered them and the battle was lost. And on October 29, 2018, Lion Air Flight 610 plunged into the Java Sea just minutes after takeoff. 189 people, gone. Families shattered, a nation in shock, and the world demanding answers. But Boeing's immediate response was firm, almost rehearsed. No design flaw, no major issue with the aircraft. Instead, they hinted at pilot error. Payoff behind the scenes, internal teams already knew MCAS was a suspect. They knew the system could force the nose down repeatedly. They knew it relied on a single sensor. They even knew about the previous flight's report. Yet nothing changed. And then, just 5 months later, the impossible happened again. Ethiopian Airlines of Flight 302 took off from Addis Ababa, and within 6 minutes, it too was fighting a losing battle against MCAS. The plane climbed, dipped, climbed again, then drove itself into the ground. 157 more lives lost. Same model, same software, same failure. Experts would later call it a textbook repeat tragedy, one disaster echoing another, because the root cause was left untouched. But did anyone try to sound the alarm, and even if they did, why weren't they heard? Well, inside Boeing, Some engineers had tried speaking up. Emails, warnings, internal messages, people questioning training gaps, software design, safety shortcuts. But those voices never made it past the walls of corporate pressure. Deadlines mattered, competition mattered, cost saving mattered, and 2 entire flights paid the price. After the second crash, lawsuits accused Boeing of admitted illegal conduct, claiming the company knowingly withheld information, failed its duty to protect passengers, and violated the trust placed in them as the world's most respected aircraft manufacturer. This was just the tip of the iceberg, because nothing could have prepared them for what was coming. After the crashes, investigators looked inside Boeing itself. Inside the Renton plant, where the 737 MAX was built, several workers had already raised concerns. Some spoke about rushed production lines, missing parts, and shortcuts taken to meet impossible deadlines. When Boeing moved its headquarters from Seattle to Chicago, something else shifted too. Engineers were suddenly separated from executives who made the financial decisions, and in its place grew a focus on cost, competition, and beating Airbus at any price. Inside meeting rooms, MCAS was still being treated as a minor tweak, nothing worth drawing attention to. But was that because Boeing truly believed MCAS was safe? Or was it because admitting flaws would mean delays, grounding, retraining costs, and a weaker position against Airbus? How did the FAA slip this? Well, many of Boeing's own employees were allowed to act as FAA representatives, a system built on trust that now looked dangerously fragile. Emails later showed some Boeing workers mocking the certification process, calling it a joke. Others admitted they wouldn't feel safe letting their own families fly on a MAX, yet the plane still rolled out. When the second crash struck, the world finally drew a hard line. Aviation authorities across dozens of countries grounded the 737 MAX, every single one of them. Airlines canceled flights and rearranged schedules. Billions of dollars vanished almost overnight. Major carriers, including Garuda Indonesia, canceled their orders entirely. The aircraft that was supposed to protect Boeing's future had now become its biggest liability. Which brings us to the nightmare they were trying to avoid, the legal consequences. In 2021, Boeing reached a massive $2.5 billion settlement with the U.S. Department of Justice, a deal that allowed the company to avoid a criminal trial. The settlement placed Boeing under a 3-year probation. But has Boeing actually changed? Or was this just another layer of corporate damage control? As the end of probation approached, Boeing once again found itself under intense scrutiny. Before anyone could breathe easy, the headlines erupted again. In early 2024, the 737 MAX returned to global news. But this time, it wasn't MCAS. Alaska Airlines 737 MAX suffered a terrifying failure. January 5, 2024. A door plug, an entire panel on the side of the fuselage, blew out mid-flight. 4 bolts that were supposed to secure the door plug, were simply missing. The plane had to make an emergency landing. Miraculously, no one died. But how does a plane leave a factory missing bolts? Investigators dug into the production chain. What they found was messy, chaotic assembly lines, incomplete paperwork, parts removed and reinstalled with no proper documentation, suppliers sending work back unfinished, and inspections relying on forms instead of physical checks. Quality control was barely functioning. The incident triggered a global grounding of MAX 9 jets for 3 weeks, and Boeing paid heavily, $160 million to Alaska Airlines alone. United Airlines reported a staggering $200 million in losses due to canceled flights, all for missing bolts. But was this really the last disaster they promised? Or was it a flashing warning light of a much deeper sickness inside Boeing? The answer would become clearer in the months that followed, when troubling reports emerged about Boeing's Dreamliner, and even its Starliner spacecraft. For years, Boeing insisted that the Dreamliner, the 787, was one of the safest long-range aircraft ever built. But inside the company, 2 men were trying to tell a very different story. John Barnett, a former Boeing quality manager, worked at the 787 plant in Charleston. He had never seen a single Dreamliner roll out of that factory that he believed was truly airworthy. Then came Sam Salahpour, a Boeing engineer who claimed the Dreamliner's fuselage, the aircraft's body, was not properly fastened together. But then the story turned tragic. Barnett was found dead in March 2024 from a reported self-inflicted gunshot wound while in the middle of giving testimony against Boeing. His death, coming at such a critical moment, sent a wave of suspicion across the public. Salahpour's claims forced the FAA to pause 787 deliveries again. The agency began investigating whether the Dreamliner could face premature structural failure. At this point, a new fear emerged. If both the MAX and the Dreamliner had major issues, did Boeing still know how to build safe airplanes? The controversy soon expanded beyond aviation, because in 2024, Boeing's Starliner spacecraft, meant to carry NASA astronauts, faced repeated delays, malfunctions, and emergency investigations. The pattern was unmistakable. After years of crisis, Boeing now says it's rebuilding from the inside out. The company has rolled out a new quality plan to the FAA, one built on 6 strict safety indicators: employee proficiency, rework hours, supplier shortages, rework per plane, traveler documentation, and ticketing performance. They've increased inspections. They've begun pausing production lines for days when defects appear. New training programs and culture surveys promise a safer, more transparent workforce. Boeing's senior vice president of quality claims the changes are already working. She says they've seen up to an 80% reduction in defects. But outside the company, trust is still on life support. The Department of Justice openly condemned Boeing for misleading regulators, stating that the company's actions impeded the government's ability to protect the flying public. For families who lost loved ones, no apology, no program, and no training manual can ever undo what happened. But what do you think? Will Boeing's new plan actually change its culture, or just its image? Let us know in the comments section below, and make sure to check out the man who started YouTube before it even became a thing.